let me formally introduce our two guests. First of all, I'm Carol Pineau. I'm a journalist based in the U.S., and I focus mostly on Africa for the last 20 years. And I'm very excited to be looking at my own industry and investment opportunities. We have with us Leonard Stiegeler, who likes to go by Leo, and he is the founder of Pulse, and Lanre Akinola, who is the editor of Nurmara. And it is great to be able to talk about opportunities in media. I think that this is an industry that is exploding, and yet one that we really haven't focused on where the opportunities are. So Leo, if I can start with you, I would love if both of you could just talk about your business and what you're doing, and sort of where you were, where you are, where you want to go. So Leo, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Carol, and hello, everybody. I think you already heard a little bit from us in a pre-conversation, but now good to do this official. Very happy to also be here with Lanre. So very shortly on Pulse, what we like to say is that we are a leading innovative media company in Africa. We have about 150 team members across Africa. These are offices that we have in Lagos, Nigeria, Accra, Ghana, Nairobi, Kenya, and Dakar, Senegal. And what we do with Pulse is we run leading mass media platforms across these 4 markets, with which we also look kind of at the broader region. So what we do is with mass media, it's news mass media, informing the young people in these markets, entertaining, engaging across the key news categories. So that's politics, that's business, that's sports, and that's also kind of daily entertainment with the great entertainment industry in all of the markets that we're in. What makes us innovative is really this focus on the young population across our markets. A lot of newspapers, so news media companies, have very much focused on the quote unquote decision makers across these markets. And we, since the beginning of Pulse, which was about 8 years ago, have always said, in the end, the real majority of the population in sub-Saharan Africa is about 18 years old. And these are really, together the decision makers of today and definitely also the decision makers of tomorrow. And they need to have great information too. So I think that's the first thing that we say, that clear focus on the young mass market makes us unique. The second thing is that we, from the beginning, understood that social media will play a huge role across Africa. So a lot of our distribution happens across the big social media channels. We run in those markets that we are in some of the biggest profiles across our channels. So what I can, for example, say as an example, our Pulse Nigeria platform, so our mass media news platform in Nigeria, runs a very big Instagram channel with about 2.5 million followers, also informing via the Instagram, social media. And then final thing I think that makes us unique is in terms of our monetization. We very much use the expertise that we gain from informing and engaging the market and our audience, also helping clients understand how to do that. So we go very deep into the value chain of marketing and digital and video production, working with leading companies across Africa to also help them do that. I think maybe one interesting fact apart from those mass media platforms is that we also are lucky to be the licensee for Business Insider, so the leading business publication globally with a licensee for Sub-Saharan Africa. So we there run the regional platform, Business Insider Africa, which if you're in Africa, you can find it under just businessinsider.com, or if you're outside and you want to check it out, that's under africa.businessinsider.com. So far from me in a nutshell.
So much. It's I was looking at your website and it's really impressive. So thank you. Lanre, please tell us about yours.
Okay, very quickly. So my background is news media, business news media focused on Africa. I spent most of the last 10 years working at international news outlets looking at Africa. And from day one, it was obvious that on the continent, there's just this huge gaping hole when it comes to news content, quality content, and viable propositions in terms of news media. So for the last few years, I've been working on trying to get to something called Namara off the ground. Long story short, what is that? It's when we get there, it'll be a subscription product aimed at international professionals looking at Africa. Low cost, on your mobile, not because apps are cool, but because that's just how people work these days. So nothing fatty, nothing gimmicky. But the bet is that there's a big, growing, underserved audience of professionals all over the world that are looking at Africa that have no obvious place to go to just get information on what is the news flow that is relevant to me as a business person, and where do I get my hands on some information about, for example, Nigeria. So what we're working on is a platform that intersects between curated news content and economic information and data. The missing piece of the puzzle so far for people who tried to do this, it's not the first attempt, is just an inability to get your head around the technology and poor design choices. It's not reinventing the wheel. You don't have to come up with some mysterious Silicon Valley algorithm. There's low-hanging fruit, but it's much easier said than done. So my point, and what I would like to focus on, is that there's a mismatch. There's a real disconnect between the importance of the news media space, the amount of talk you hear about the news media space and how important it is to develop it, and the willingness to invest in it. There are good reasons for this, but there are, I think, also really bad reasons for this. And that juxtaposition, I think, is something that is worth looking at. And just as a general point, and I'll end here, it's refreshing to be having this conversation, but let's not forget that the media opportunity is also video content and, of course, music content, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the investment at the moment. But let's not leave out news, because that falls through the cracks a lot.
Well, absolutely. One of the themes that I'm hearing from both of you is the issue that information is power, and that more that people have information, the more powerful they are. The more that you have an empowered population, and the importance of that. And media definitely is the biggest vehicle for that. There are some trends that are happening throughout Africa, and you've touched on many of these, but that have really contributed to the media market. Of course, the youth bulge. And Leo, you talked about how the average age being 18, really looking at the youth market, the middle class, the consumer class, which is hundreds of millions of people. And then the tech revolution that started out with just bringing, the revolution of bringing cell phones to Africa. And this is just one more major spin-off that has happened from that. But looking at these trends, how do you look at investment in Africa? What areas do you look in? And Leo, maybe I can start with you, but before you start, I just want to say, please, everybody, put your questions in the chat. I'm going to be coming back to them very soon, so please start putting them in. And Leo, if you can talk about the different, how these trends are coming together to create decisions that you're making in your business.
I think it's very important to look what the position of the market already is when. So I think you named some of the trends that are unique also to Africa. Very young population, very mobile population. Lanre, you said it when you look at Nurmara and how you look to build it, is to understand just where we're at. And one other element is different to other markets around the world. The young population digitally has really grown up with social media. So a lot of the media brands have essentially a chance, or new media brands have a chance to use that fact also to introduce themselves to an audience that might have never before really been introduced, and as a mass population, to strong media brands. That doesn't mean that they weren't around, but they haven't before maybe been able to reach that many people as that was the case in other markets across the world. So I think that's actually for new media companies quite an opportunity, and we're seeing quite a few companies that are hopping on that trend. So I think to answer that question, Carol, I would say the environment always impacts how to develop the business, and not being blind to what the environment is super, super important. I do sometimes have the feeling that international media companies might think, oh, we are just going to do the same thing again that we did in other markets because the market in Africa is earlier. But it's not earlier at all, actually. It's much further in many aspects. I just give one example of that. When you look at the social media use in Africa, it's extremely far developed in terms of penetration, in terms of also how young people are expressing themselves on social media, how they're using social media for commerce. There's a lot actually that other markets can learn from that. So this is maybe this famous aspect of leapfrogging certain elements. I just think it's very important for news media to understand it and how that applies to us in the news media, and what kind of opportunities also come from that as well. One of them being much easier distribution, as that was the case 10, 20, 30 years ago, where you first had to build a printing plant to reach 500,000 people. Now with the right content, you can reach with your brand 5 million people in not that much time, as long as you really focus on the right content for that audience. And with that, also be able to build a brand without having that massive investment up front. So maybe some of the aspects that we look at.
No, these are very interesting points. Lanre, you're mostly in the news part and bringing the news to people, wanting to bring a different voice and, create a platform where people can go for that information. How important do you think it is for Africans to own those platforms? We have news that comes in from CNN and BBC and all these others, but how important is it that Africans themselves own those platforms, that the African voice is owned by Africans?
Sure. So before I respond to that point specifically, a couple of things I want to touch on. You said, Carol, earlier that information is power. That's true. I think importantly, and in some ways more importantly, information is also money. And I think that's something that is missing in the understanding of what the news media opportunity is and the information opportunity is when it comes to Africa. The rest of the world isn't really seriously looking at the place right now in terms of sort of high quality content geared towards your professional audiences. No one's doing it. Okay, so right there's a massive opportunity that's not being looked at. The barriers to entry, very important point Leo made, are completely different from even 10, 15 years ago, right? You can think of doing things now that were physically impossible 10 years ago. And Leo gave some good examples of that. So I think it's worth underlining that. Now, how important is it to have African-owned media? It is very important, but I think mostly but not for sentimental or emotional reasons. I think people sometimes go too far down the sentimental track with, we need the African voice, we need to empower Africa. For me, it's like, look, if you've got the right platform, you don't need to worry about that. The empowerment will come. The important thing is you need the right platforms. I think the reason it makes a difference if those are African owned, or at least you have meaningful African agency in that, is that they're vested in getting it right. You cannot expect CNN to get it right about Africa. CNN is a commercial operation that, they sell the news, and we know if it bleeds, it leads. And we know that Africa, from an international media standpoint, it's the chaos continent, hunger, war, blah, blah, blah. If it ain't that story, we're not interested. That's not going to change, and it's not realistic to sit here and complain about it all the time. So if you have a more African agency in the process, they are just by definition going to be more careful with the story. You have to be. So to make that point very short, what you need is an equivalent to like an Al Jazeera, which has done for the Middle East region what really nothing has done for Africa yet, which is provide a counterweight more than anything. Whatever you think of Al Jazeera, I'm talking here about the underlying dynamics and the structural issues that you need to understand. It's not about opinion about the content. So it's important from that standpoint. If you have the right platform, you don't need to worry about Africa empowering itself. What you need is a megaphone that can shout back when someone else is out there talking nonsense.
But, Lanre, you bring up something really important that, you need an Al Jazeera for Africa, but yet where is the funding for that? And Lanre, when we thought we were not live, when we actually were live and we were laughing about how, everyone says, oh, this is so important. Okay, can you invest? Oh, no, I don't invest in media. So, Leo, maybe actually I can toss it to you because you do invest in media. What made you decide to invest in this sector that others were not really paying attention to, which is probably the reason?
Well, I think media, when you look at the fundamentals in African internet, growing distribution, you named it before, of smartphones across the market over the last 10 years. Internet broadband prices coming down for mobile internet, so mobile internet being much wider distributed, but at the same time, to not say everything is rosy, the medium income across all of the markets that we are in is, compared to many other news markets in Europe, still lower. But media actually is in terms of distribution, it's much cheaper than when you look at e-commerce, when you look at other paid services, so to say. So I think just looking at what is possible to be done on the internet and what people are actually doing, when you look at the biggest use cases for the internet in Africa, it is actually communication first of all. Then it becomes media consumption. And then further are digitally paid services, and only then e-commerce comes along. So I think in terms of looking at it as an industry to have a positive impact, to build a company that is really mass market, I think media is kind of a no-brainer industry to look at. Now comes the question, okay, but for an investment point of view, there is also the question of return. And I think I just believe there was too much focus by a lot of investors on kind of traditional models, like this is how it has to work. This is how it worked in other markets. So we're going to do it the same way. And I think while using international platforms or using the fact that mobile internet is growing, I think it's just very important to understand exactly how your business model is going to also become sustainable. But again, based on the fact that you can actually do a mass consumption business model on the back of media, which looking at any other internet business model in Africa is much, much harder. So I think that's a little bit the perspective. How we then think about monetization is again to obviously look at the fact that general digital marketing is still fairly low. So you need to go further into the value chain to be able to also run a sustainable business. That's what we have done. But then with a growing middle class, as you describe it, with a growing, just also being used to spending money online, which is also growing in Africa, we obviously then look at additional business models that focus actually more on the user monetization as well. So that's why I would say media has been a good business model, but also I think it's important to mention, I think media is often also something to do because you do feel and you do want to give a platform for great journalism and great voices, you named it before, by our editors in our markets, which is a fundamental mission that we have with Pulse.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you say that that people weren't looking at the market correctly. And I think that's so true. Lanre, I saw you raise your
Yeah.
finger. You clearly have a comment.
Yeah.
Please.
So here's a view from the other side of the table, which is someone who's trying to get money and has been trying for some time to get funding for an Africa-focused news media project. Look, it's not an attractive proposition in general for investors. And Leo makes a good point, which is there's an expectation mismatch of what you're going to get. Your typical investor is used to being, to getting, the next Uber, the next this, the next that, right? That's what everyone's promising. If you're looking at news media in Africa, there is no neat proposition that ticks all the boxes right now. This is one of the good reasons that investors don't look at it. It's just no sort of off-the-shelf proposal that's like a no-brainer from a model standpoint, which is reflective of the bigger problem with the news industry. It's all the disruption. But of course, with all that disruption comes tremendous opportunity, which I would say then ultimately makes it a mistake to rule out media, because there isn't like on day one the spreadsheet that says this is where you get your 40 times X, right? That's kind of what your average investor will ask for. Very difficult to deliver that right now. So that's firsthand what we're experiencing, what I'm experiencing. Not surprised by it at all. But I would say that, that really, I would just say it's a mistake. I mean, I would say that, but look, information is money. Ask Bloomberg about that. Ask Reuters about that. Yeah, information is money. And if you get the right platform, you print money with information. There is currently no dedicated information platform for Africa. When I say information, I'm speaking specifically here about the sort of business policy economy space. And Leo, to your point earlier, it's not just for the decision makers. No, there's a much bigger market out there, not quite as mass market as what you do, but certainly a much bigger demographic than just your Mayfair hedge fund manager or private equity investor, which is what usually people go for. It is the proverbial untapped opportunity right now. Everyone is chasing the news media holy grail everywhere else in the world. Everyone wants to crack India. Everyone wants to crack the American market, obviously, right? Everyone wants to crack the millennial market. Nobody's trying to crack the Africa market when it comes to this. So that's where the hope is that we can fly below radar long enough till someone says, hey, actually, you know what, this does kind of make sense, and then scale up from there. Because just because something starts small, and Africa's kind of small, doesn't mean it can't grow. And I think people underestimate the potential for scale in Africa a lot. Sorry, I can go on ad nauseum. I will stop there.
No, I know. All three of us are very passionate about this. Somebody, Tim Baton has a question here that I think is really interesting, asking about views on subscription and paywall versus traditional. Does paywall work in Africa? And I think this is a really interesting question, because it gets into a lot of these issues that are often, Africa is a poor continent, they don't have money to pay. And then all of a sudden cell phones come in and you realize, actually, people have a lot of money to pay. There's, sort of a lot there that is not captured in traditional ways of determining GDP. So how do you see that paywall versus free viewership? Maybe Leo, I'll start with you, and then Lanre, I can see you have something also to say on that. That's great.
Lanre, if you don't mind, Carol, maybe Lanre, because you.
All right, sure.
Finished a long rant, please. Let people
please, Lanre,
hear from Leo. Okay,
I'll
very quick response on this one. I think the better question is, do paywalls work in general? Because I would say what's true for paywalls in other parts of the world will be true in Africa. And I think that paywalls are a very high risk strategy. I would say from experience, what I've seen, paywalls can work, but the conditions have to be very specific. And one of the most important conditions is I think you need to be specialized in order to do paywalls, because paywalls are effectively subscriptions, right? And what people subscribe to are highly specialized products. And one of the big difficulties and failures of the news industry has been trying to monetize generic content through a subscription, which is just not possible in an age of targeted content. like it ain't gonna work. And like the New York Times and the FT are there's the gold standard when it comes to digital subscriptions, and everyone likes to reel off their fantastic subscription numbers, the millions of people who subscribe to the New York Times or the FT. My response to that is always, how can you possibly use that as a benchmark? These are super brands, right? Like, and even when you look at the numbers, those subscription numbers, even for these mega brands, right, are tricky. They aren't printing money off these subs. So if it's difficult with a blank check brand to go out there and make paywalls work, then if you are any other type of news outlet, you're going to have, I think, a very hard time, unless you focus and specialize. But then you might as well just become a subscription product, which makes more sense in the long term.
Yeah. Leo, what are your...
I think maybe just to add to what Lanre said, I think we don't believe in this, okay, so there's either there's paywall or not, and then there's these two camps that say paywall and not paywall. I think more it's always about, what is your business model as a whole? And that might not just be, I think this discussion of paywall or all free comes from, let's say, traditional newspapers wanting to keep as much of their traditional business as possible, and paywall being as close as possible to what they did before, which is, users subscribing to a daily newspaper that was sent to their house, and or buying it at the kiosk. We thought more about reaching users with the right information, maybe users paying for some value that they don't get somewhere else. That speaks to Lanre's point about, you got to be specific about what value are you adding that others aren't adding. So there might be specific newsletters on specific topics. And I think more things like this. In the end, we are in English and French-speaking markets. For English and French-speaking markets, when it comes to news media, there's local language media as well. But when it comes to what we do and what many of the media companies do, I think we're in these markets, and that's what people read. And there's a lot of English and French content out there. So I think it's very important to really make sure that what you then have a paid user commercial model for, you're very specific about what value you're driving. But again, just to emphasize, I think there's many ways of generating value from a great brand that delivers great content to people, understands the market well, and is in the thick of it of African content, of news, entertainment, information, as Lanre says it. It doesn't need to just be free or paid subscription.
Yeah. If I can, Carol, if I may, just a quick follow-up, because that point is really important. Like, you have to have a holistic understanding of what your proposition is. And that the point Leo makes around wanting to keep doing the same thing is probably the single biggest reason the industry has not been able to transition. Because
I think you're talking globally, not just...
Yeah, exactly, globally. Very much so. It's spot on. I mean, I've seen it firsthand at some of the biggest news outlets out there. I've seen it firsthand. And the overriding imperative has been, how do we keep doing what we've been doing all the time, ignoring the obvious answer, which is you don't. Okay. And finally, the other point around the business model is, I think key is, how do you minimize friction between the consumer of your content and your platform? This is something, again, that the news media industry has completely failed to grasp. That what you need to do is, like, you need to understand what is the process from content origination to how your user is engaging with that content, and how is your platform adding value to that, right? And if you want to get answers to that, don't look at what the FT is doing. My goodness, don't look at what the industry is doing. Look at what other native digital and tech industries and companies are doing. The inspiration for what we're trying to do did not come from the news media space. It came from video game streaming and music streaming. Because that's where you're going to find the models that are going to work. Because what we're talking about is models that add value to content. Content can be written, news content, it can be data, or it can be music, or it can be video. It's content. The vehicle The delivery is where the value is. And that's what the industry hasn't clocked.
But Lanre, you bring up something really interesting that, so often when people come into Africa, particularly from the outside, what they want to do is recreate something that has been outside of Africa and do the same thing in Africa. And invariably, it doesn't do well. The people who, come in or that are growing out of Africa are looking at it of having, their own personal way in that. And Leo, I'm wondering, when you came into the market, how you incorporated the African ideas of this, instead of just, okay, I'll recreate something here and scotch tape it in here, instead to create something that was really a very different model. Looking at your website, it's just so beautifully done of really feeling the African content, and that it's so unique and so beautiful. I would just love to hear how you have done that.
The first and most important answer is that it's not me who has done it, but our editors-in-chief in every single market. When we look at mass media, as I said, these Pulse platforms that we do in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Senegal. So pulse.ng, if you want to check that out, pulse.ng as an example in Nigeria. That is led by our editor-in-chief, Ben Bassi, who is ultimately responsible for the content on this platform. And I think that understanding is first and foremost very, very important. What we then add to that, I think, to that local expertise is a certain international technology expertise, where we also work with, for example, a team out of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is actually very advanced when it comes to technology in news media. So, being local doesn't mean not to take advantage of the fact of international connection and international expertise from around the world. So I think that's maybe a combination to definitely look at when it comes to the technology of things, and also to, what is cutting edge in terms of what's being done on social media across the world. I found it resonated with me, Lanre, when you said you look at another industry in media and see how that could be applied. One could say that in our usage of social media to inform and engage our audience, a lot of international big YouTubers and big Instagram accounts have played a role in terms of how much we post, how we think about engagement, etc., etc. But then, and I think then I bring it back to the role of editorial, is that we have a clear mission that stands behind everything, and that is to inform and engage young people in our markets. That's true for all markets. So that's kind of an international value that's then lived by local leading editorial teams that are using this platform to be a voice for this young audience. So maybe that's the combination. I think that's the combination of editorial, locally editorial, and then international expertise when it comes to some of the technology. Final point on this, what we are now seeing actually is that on a lot of those things, we are actually, cutting edge when it comes to video. You named it, Lanre, video use for news. So we do, for example, a concept where we do news in 30 seconds to 1 minute in a video. And we do about, 15 pieces of that a day that are then running via our different platforms that just bring news in a very short format, because young people like to see news visually as well. And that's something actually in the usage of that. We do about now 100 million video views a month. And I think that's globally, that's a global standard that we achieve by, having been very, very early with video on social media.
Yeah. Leo, you are in several markets and you have Pulse Nigeria, Pulse Senegal. And Lanre, as I understand, you're looking at a platform that cuts across the continent. Farid Arab is asking, how do you manage the multiplicity of languages? I would add to that cultures, cultural sensitivities. How do you bridge the continent or do you do it in individual markets?
Pretty simple. I look. I don't want to sound flippant. And it's not that difficult. Like, one of the big game changes is the web. So you can cover just so much more ground. Logistically, you can leverage that to just pump out much more content than you would have been able to in an analog setting. So that's one of the ways to do it. But I think the more important definer of how you tackle those issues is, well, how do you define your proposition? Who exactly is it for? Like the things like Francophone versus Anglophone. I mean, there it's just a budget line, right? Like, it's like pay for a translation service. I mean, like, that's kind of how you handle it. It depends on how local you are. I mean, if you're doing proper local news, if you're doing environmental activism and stuff like that, if that's what you're covering, you're going to be dealing with very different issues. The category that we're focusing on is very clean from that standpoint, in that people tend not to have particularly strong opinions about business news. One thing I like about business news is that it kind of has to be a little bit more honest than the politics, which is just full of nonsense from A to Z, because you're talking to people with money, and people who are thinking about what to do with that money, and they kind of need to know what's actually happening, as opposed to some weird sort of agenda behind it. So we don't have an agenda, don't need one, but that's because it's a very conscious, deliberate decision. And in terms of trying to cover a whole continent and beyond, the magic trick is curation. The challenge of news for me these days is not so much origination, because most people don't know this, but the vast majority of news that you consume on a daily basis starts with Reuters and Bloomberg. Almost all of it. Very little of the news you consume on a daily basis is first-hand stuff. You're not getting direct reporting. So most news is already curated, but it's not properly curated. So I would say the big value addition is proper curation, people who know how to do that. And it sounds easy. It's much more tricky to do properly. That's where the value is, because everyone is bombarded with information now. The challenge is, what can I trust? What can I rely on? What's going to give me what I need without me wasting my time and just getting all this crap? So we're keeping it very clean, which is why we're also not doing any advertising, no plans to do so, not yet. It's something that could become relevant in the future, but I think it's important at this point. Sorry, very long way of saying it kind of depends on your proposition, really. I think that's the key.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I'd love to hear from both of you on where you think the industry is going to be going, where you think the media investment opportunities are going. Lanre, you've given it away in
I'm kidding.
In a couple minutes. So Leo, please go ahead.
Maybe I would like to have Lanre start, if you don't mind, Lanre, because I like the clear opinions. So I'd love to hear it, and maybe counter it as well. Maybe to see.
Okay. All right. My position on this has been that the future for traditional news media is non-existent. Okay, that's it. We got to face up to that. It's reality. But that doesn't mean the end of news media. Not at all. I will go back to the simple point. Information is both power and money. Power and money are in hot demand. Okay, all over the world. Doesn't matter where you are. Everybody wants it. Africa is untapped when it comes to monetizing information. It just is. So it's inevitable that a business like this has to be built at some point. The question is, how long is it going to take, and who are going to be the people to do it? So I actually think that the future for news content, for news media, is potentially phenomenal. The pandemic has underlined that for me. The reliance on digital content is only going to go up, and news media is in this unique position where it no longer requires any physical assets. Like, in principle, you don't need any physical assets beyond a laptop or a mobile device. As long as you can access your CMS and you can upload and publish your content, it is, it doesn't matter. And that, to me, is a tremendous opportunity. which surely is going to be monetized. So this is a rare thing for me to say, but honestly, I'm optimistic about the future of information and news, but I'm not optimistic about the future of the traditional news business.
That's very interesting. Leo, please go ahead.
In a very short time frame, just to say, and also to answer maybe Simon's question there about trusted news sources. I believe, even on social media, good news sources are even more important, because with an overload of information and content, good sources stand out and can reach a greater audience actually now on social media than before. And with regards to the business and the opportunity of media, I think, again, media has an opportunity to reach massive amounts of audience already in Africa, which a lot not digital businesses are doing. And then with that are able to, if they're smart, find business models that build on top of that. And I think if that's the business of information, if it's the business of marketing, if that's the business of adding more value to users that is then paid in the digital sphere with growing digital services that media through its trust can tap into. I think all of those can be tapped into with the great distribution and trust that is being built with media, be that on the own websites or be that on social media. I think it's important to embrace the reality of the distribution channels and build the business on top of that.
So, well, unfortunately, we are at the end of the time. This has been a great discussion. I can tell because I got to almost none of the prepared questions that I had, which means that things really flowed, and it was really great talking to both of you.
I feel responsible for that.
Not at all. It always makes it a better discussion. So this has just been great, and really just interesting to look at the media industry and how this is changing, and really how the opportunities are both exploding and also limited, and how, the importance of voice and the importance of information being power. So thank you so much to both of you for being part of this. Carol. And thank you to NABA for holding this. It's been great talking to you. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to the organizers or whatever we are to do.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Lanre.
Thank you. Pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.